guess I've got a life to figure out. And it's not going to be anything I thought it was 3 years ago when it was just all a rocket ship to success.
The world is obsessed with fast-track success. It's easy to think that people become successful overnight. But let's face it, more often than not, what we see on social media is total BS. I'm here to look past the perception of perfect success and focus on life's detours, perceived mistakes, and even wrong choices, and understand the real road traveled up the career ladder. After all, we're all effing up. Hunter Smith is the founder and former president of Champion Brewing Company and Champion Hospitality Group. Hunter attended Northeastern University for music and performed as a musician in the Northeast before returning home to Virginia in 2009. Hunter completed a BS in business marketing from the University of Phoenix, as well as a Certificate of Brewing Technology from the Siebel Institute of Chicago, and soon thereafter started Champion Brewing Company in downtown Charlottesville. Hunter has also become an active member in the Charlottesville community, serving as a board member for the Music Resource Center, Piedmont Housing Alliance, New Hill Development Company, and in June of 2018 was appointed to the City of Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review by City Council. Hunter also works in an advisory role at his family's winery in Nelson County, and as co-chair of government affairs for the Virginia Craft Brewers Guild. Hunter is often recognized as the grandson of C. Ray Smith, a long-tenured professor and interim dean of the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business. Hunter, good morning. Thanks for being here.
Hey, good morning. Happy to be here.
Why don't we start the podcast out by having you educate the listeners on what you're up to today in terms of your work life?
I'm actually doing some research on co-packers and writing a go-to-market strategy for my next startup. Starting to get my legs back under me after previous failures.
I'm sure we'll get more into that as we go along chronologically. Let's go to your childhood. Is there anything that comes to mind for you when you look back and you think of your rearing and you think of something in particular that kind of shapes who you are today, how your career has landed, or perhaps done the opposite?
Yeah, my parents were both entrepreneurs, fallen into the same trap, so to speak. But in particular, watching my dad and the success he had through his journey and his dad, a well-known figure in higher education, there was no, I don't want to say externally applied, but internally applied. Pressure is probably the wrong word too, but just that sort of need to go, hey, me too. Like I've always felt when you have a legacy, there's something to live up to. And that was always in the back of my mind. But not being in real estate or higher education, for example, I had to find my own way and blaze my own path. But that family dynamic just always felt like I was set up to follow some sort of that path.
My husband went to the Darden School of Business at UVA, and I was with him during that time living in Charlottesville for 2 years. And even being an outsider from the university myself and just watching my husband's path, I know the Smith name. I know
Wow.
C.
Okay.
Ray Smith, and I didn't even attend a class. I worked at the Darden School, so that name is socialized. And so I think it means a little bit more hearing you say that because I can understand how revered he was.
Yeah, certainly no small shadow to grow up
Yeah,
in. Wonderful.
right.
Yeah,
And you didn't ask for that. You
right.
didn't ask to be part of that lineage. As you went through your teen years, was there pressure in terms of you going to university? What was the thought process around you yourself wanting that, not wanting it, and ultimately what happened?
I went to a private college prep school that started in second grade. That is the school's objective is I think it was like a 99% college placement record for graduates, and that's what they want to maintain. So you're going to do well and go to college. And I enjoyed my experience and loved the high school I went to. So I don't begrudge that at all. But at the same rate, yeah, it was in 10th grade. It was, okay, where are we going to go to college? What are we going to do there? The latter was what was pretty lost on me. I did want to go to college. I definitely prepared myself to go to school, but I didn't know exactly what academia had to offer me in terms of either career prep or that would be a sort of sustaining journey for me. I was into punk rock. I was spent most of my time either skateboarding or hanging out with friends and going to shows, being around an environment. I had a great college counselor to help me think about where should I go and
Mm,
what schools have what kind of programs. And
mhm.
I could not think about anything but music. I performed all through high school and into college as well. And certainly there's no lack of mention from either your advisors or society that, hey, one out of every million people gets to be a performing musician. So I try to do my best job thinking what sort of real job, so to speak, is there around my passion.
Mm,
I was ready to get out of small town and where
yeah.
everybody knows either your name or your dad's name or your grandfather's name or whatever. I ended up in Boston at Northeastern for their music industry program.
Did you play a particular instrument or did you sing?
I was a singer-songwriter, so I primarily played a piano or keyboard
Wow.
when out live, but guitar as well. As a teenager, I could hear my dad and my grandfather voices in my head. Pursue your passion, but also think about how can you sustain
Mhm.
this? I genuinely felt a really supportive and really shared a passion of, yeah, go try, go see if that'll work. And they let me do some stuff that's hard to imagine now as a parent myself. Go to Brooklyn to meet this manager and record some demos in his apartment as an 18-year-old and some other shit that I'm like, man, they were brave in their own right
Yeah,
just to let for me, it didn't seem brave. I was like, finally, I could get out of
of
Virginia and go
course.
do
Yeah.
whatever I want. Because,
You're a teen thinking you're an adult at that point. Yeah,
exactly. I know
we can
everything. And
all think back to that period of our life where you're like, "Parents, get off my back. I know what I'm doing." And then you become an actual adult and you're like, "I had no clue what I was doing. I had no business acting like that. My poor
oh
parents."
man, I know. And I especially think about this is, obviously a time before smartphones and stuff. I'm like, man, I really was just walking around Brooklyn. Oh, I know how to book a flight. So I know how to navigate the whole world that I've never really been part of. But that was part of the thrill. I really
Yeah, of
wanted
course.
to get out of my comfort zone. I very quickly did and developed no shortage of anxiety and other issues while in school and that far away from people I love. But they were genuinely supportive. And
Mm,
uh, if anything, we've all agreed, hey, in hindsight, maybe it would have been worthwhile not going straight to college, maybe taking 1 year to try to
mhm,
give that as hard of a run as possible
mm,
so that by the time I did go to school, I was ready for it. I had either gotten that out of my system or had seen how far I could take it.
mm,
And that's what ultimately happened when I dropped out in '07 and ended up going back to school online. I did way better than I ever did as an aspiring musician who just followed the path. By the time I chose to go to school for business, I chose to go to school for business because I wanted to. I was passionate about it and thought I could
yeah,
apply it productively. Whereas the going to college for music while also actively playing music with the manager and a record label, and I was going from Boston to New York and New Jersey almost every weekend while in school. So it was very much torn between actively trying to pursue that dream and goal and also like turn in my assignments or go to class, neither of which happened as much as they should have.
You mentioned a record label. Was that journey tough or did that kind of fall in your lap?
It fell in my lap.
Mm,
I have had a ridiculously fortunate path in that regard. It was also a fun time in music in general. I was just reading a book about the sort of MySpace era of music and how so many of us rapidly were able to gain access to a fan base or to other networks that previously it was either a joke or a super hard grind to hear stories of Henry Rollins using public payphones to book a tour from one city to the next. Hey, we're coming to St. Louis. Where can we play? So obviously, it was fun to come of age in that sort of era. But I had a few demos up my senior year of high school and sent them to a manager who I had read about in one of my favorite music magazines. Just, hey, check me out. I like the other bands you manage and I'm looking for representation. I want to take this thing next level. He checked out my stuff and I was shocked to even get a response. And the response was, I like what you're doing. Come to New York and let's record some demos and see if we can push this thing farther. And he represented some other acts that were pretty well known. And so there was a little bit of immediate clout. And then as we worked on demos for a couple of years, we were able to move things into, hey, let's actually try to record and get it picked up and distributed. That happened in May of my senior year.
Senior year of high school.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was definitely, I use this euphemism all the time, but I was Stretch Armstrong, like completely pulled thin of, I really want to do
Yeah,
this and I should do this. So naturally, I spent more time playing music than going to class.
of
Uh,
course.
that really didn't have anything to do with why I stopped going to school.
Used the words dropped out earlier. What was the straw that broke the camel's back?
Honestly, I had a really bad panic attack, and I think both the sheer terror associated with dealing with that and not really knowing what those are or were was totally overwhelming. But I also think it was culmination of that period of not knowing what the fuck I was gonna do. At any given point, I needed to be in class at 8 AM studying music theory, and I needed to be on a Chinatown bus to get onto the PATH train to get to New Jersey so that I could be in the studio and working on what was so important in this sort of crazy opportunity I had. Was as lucky as I was, it was never lost on me that I got a tiger by the tail and managed to get someone's attention that was way out of my league. And I had a hell of an opportunity. And so, yeah, I was very conflicted about that. And also the whole time in a long distance relationship with my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
Hmm.
So that one worked out. But aside from that, it was, yeah, it was really difficult to have those conflicting priorities. And that was exacerbated by mental health issues that developed at the time. Came home for my 21st birthday. And when it was time to go back, I remember very clearly I was showering and getting ready to go to the airport and was like, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to happen. And you can imagine with some legacy stuff we talked about earlier, I almost feel like it would have been better if I hadn't gone to college
Mm.
and gone right into other things I was doing, like HVAC installing and other ways I was generating income, than to go and to drop out.
I don't think I considered that idea before about someone who had started and stopped versus someone who had not started at all. Like you said, you think it would have been better if you had not started at all. That's fascinating. And I can certainly see the validity in that comment and the added pressure that would come with all the phrases that we use, like you're a quitter.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
just wasn't the right thing at the right time. Just as we think about getting fired from a job, there's so much stigma and taboo around it. But
Sure.
what if it's just not the right fit, not the right time? Why does it have to be
Opportunity
anything
to have
more
something
than
wake.
that? And that's
Yeah.
exactly, it sounds like the school situation for you. I'd like to double click on the anxiety piece and the
Sure.
panic attack. When did you realize that it was a panic attack? I'm asking this from a place of I had my own history with this, where I was in a great place in my career and in my marriage. And I started having severe chest pain, and then that would escalate, and my mind would go nuts. And I thought I was having heart problems. And I
Mhm.
ended up at the ER and in the hospital several times and had EKGs and all the tests. I'm not in the medical field, so I don't remember all the tests. And this has been quite some
No, I
time now. And finally, at a specialty hospital, a doctor saying to me, this is nothing. Like, he didn't say this is nothing, but he was actually quite curt about it. Can't remember his exact words, but it was like, this isn't a heart issue. You're having panic attacks. And I
clinically, you're fine.
and I was like, this isn't panic attack. You don't understand the pain I'm feeling and all that
Going to
comes with
die, don't
it.
you
And he's like,
understand?
yeah. And he's, no, I don't think you understand. All the tests are great. And I was in such denial and I was mortified. And I told no one. In
Oh,
fact,
wow, yeah.
in fact, this is the first time I have had an out loud conversation with someone about it. Said
This
this right now.
wow.
I was even right now, like I'm feeling emotional. My hairs are standing up on my arm. I'm feeling very uncomfortable. I was in such disbelief because I had my shit together. Like it made no sense. So I did not believe the doctor. And I remember telling my husband, this guy's a crock. I was pissed. So I'm telling you all this because I feel like I was in disbelief of what happened. And it was hard for me to come to the realization. And I would say I didn't actually fully buy into it until a decade later that
You
I was
didn't
having.
truly believe that you were physically fine, but that it was a mental issue, like a mental issue?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, it's hard to accept that one, am I crazy? Of course, the vernacular has changed so much in the
Yeah.
20 years. You feel like you're fucking totally a mental case. And I feel bad in hindsight for my parents because like I was saying about vernacular, so much more is known now. It's so much more socially understood. You can say, "Hey, who else has panic attacks?" And people will say, "Oh my God, me, let's talk about it." Not in every community, but at least in general, much more destigmatized and more easily treated. And I just feel bad for them as a parent now with a 12-year-old who has her anxiety issues, and I have at least a good toolbox to help her work through it. It doesn't scare or concern me about her as I have to assume it did for them because it was just such a relatively unknown thing of what is an anxiety attack? What
Right.
is this like apparently crippling, debilitating inability to go to school or the grocery store? They in some ways learned a lot on that journey with me, but that feeling of uh, it's a tough confluence to describe because it's so emotionally difficult, but that feeling of all the things about anxiety and the things that make your head go crazy and hate yourself, things combined with being 21 and just dropping out of school and everything else. I felt like a total piece of shit, wasted life. Aside from my parents and sister and girlfriend and friends, I always had a great support system, but just generally felt like a big failure. And
Yeah.
had to work my way out of that sort of college dropout. And of course, then I was living when I dropped out, I was living back in Suffolk, Virginia, not in back Bay, Boston. And those are very different communities to try to get a music career
Right.
off out in. And so I had to accept, hey, unless I want to get back on the horse and either go back to school or living in a major market. Um, and this sounds insulting to some of my colleagues, and I don't mean it that way, but I would have to accept being a local band, basically. If I'm not going to be mentally capable or have whatever that sort of fortitude I was yearning for to go on tour or get back to the city, that I was probably going to end up in the bar circuit playing covers. And that's a perfectly viable life. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people who do it very well and are very passionate about it. And it's not, it wasn't,
Not
but it
what you
was
had envisioned.
I had career ambitions
Yeah.
and it was going to a top 100 school for music while being on a Warner Brothers affiliate. And so I had some of my professors would actually call on me during class and say, "Hey, Hunter, why am I talking? Can you tell us what's going on at the record label right now?" And I would gladly answer and be the center of attention because I love both of those things. But at the same time, I thought that's not really what my parents are paying for. I'm here to learn, not share my experience. So
Yeah.
it was very much being in two places, bodies, minds at once. But was
A lot of
the
pressure.
extra sort of gross part of that spiral was like, man, I really don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I did my best at college and music and both have significantly cooled off. And so now I'm 21 and living in Suffolk and I guess I've got a life to figure out. And it's not going to be anything I thought it was 3 years ago when it was just all a rocket ship to success while graduating from high school, which is just a goofy amount of, yeah, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like opportunity at the time. Inherently, there's pressure there.
Yeah. You land back in Suffolk. Where does the road take you immediately when you're back?
The first thing in my mind was I got to get out of my parents' house. There's like being a college dropout and there being a college dropout that lives and mooches off of my parents. So I tried to, while going to therapy and trying to figure out how to handle the anxiety component of things, I've got to try to find a way to put that in my pocket and get my ass out of the door and to work and be a productive member of society. As I find myself like parroting, that's obviously not something I think about necessarily. I thought about what could I do that would not require me to go to the city or break my brain or any of these other things as I'm trying to develop myself. And this will certainly work its way into the rest of the conversation. But I developed a hell of a drinking habit. I was in college as a cool kid on campus and playing shows and all this other stuff and managed to try to turn that into a little bit of a sort of career focus for me. I was passionate about it. I was really interested in variety of products. And I mean, obviously there's the underlying way it makes you feel, but I really thought it was a cool space. And so I actually, I think my first gig after dropping out was as a clerk at a state run liquor store. And so it
The
was
ABC?
the ABC store.
Yeah.
I can run the cash register, definitely interested in the samples, but for the most part, for as much as it was like not a great job, but interesting, but learned a lot about branding and customer
Course, yeah.
feedback.
I mean,
And
talk about getting a education and all the things.
yeah, absolutely. From the sort of labels on the shelf to the prosaic descriptions on the back of the bottle to okay, this is what this lady comes in and goes for. And then
Yeah.
there's obviously some real world education too. What's the bell jingling because someone's rattling the door at 8:55 before we open at 9 a.m.
Ooh,
And I was like, fuck, there was some gruesome
brutal.
side of selling liquor too as a 21-year-old. So that was my sort of first push out of the sort of nest and back onto my feet. And then from there, I had a great friend who had become a bar manager, and he gave me my first bar backing job, and
Mm.
that's sprung me into the industry.
Like to go back when you mentioned that you worked for, I can't even remember the words that you used, but the ABC, your tone shifted a little bit. And it
Oh,
immediately
interesting.
made me want to ask you, does it feel shameful to mention?
Oh, wow. That's funny. That was just a shit period in my life. It's hard
Mm.
to recall, frankly. It's not something I talk to a lot of people about. It's funny because I think between the legacy and how my brewing career and stuff has gone, there's maybe a perception that I was a silver spoon kid, and so I'm not sure if many people know that I had jobs before I was just handed a startup, so to speak. So yeah, it was a really different world. It was a really different time in my life. And I saw a lot of different walks of life that frankly, I really hadn't been exposed to at my white flight college prep school. So there was a lot of life lessons to be gleaned from that gig and others, and from moving to Boston and being a part of a big city and all of those things. No, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud of it. I've had a number of those types of jobs. I was always very motivated to work, and that's not a generational pressure thing. That's just who I am. I had the permit from my parents to work at 15 before it was like legal to just go in and take a job. And I was rounding up carts and ringing up groceries, and then worked at a Blockbuster after that. So I,
That's great.
I always enjoyed some of this retail, but it's interesting that you picked up in a tone shift. If anything, maybe it's less about that job and more about just that period in my life where it
Mhm.
was pretty dark.
Yeah.
I was dealing with what you've described of that. I do not know what's going on with my body, but my bowels only produce water and I have to go to the bathroom every 15 minutes. I had on top of the hard to say on top of anxiety, but maybe coupled with or as a result of the anxiety, IBS and stuff like that. And so working an 8-hour retail shift was challenging when you'd have to sometimes just disappear to the restroom. I've joked with my parents since about now that if you go to Manhattan, you can get, your phone will tell you what steps to take to get on public transit. And I think there's even an app now that'll tell you what the nearest public bathroom is.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was just sheer misery. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was a tough path really
Mm.
until about 2007, 2008. And then I ended up proposing to actually at the time we were recently broken up, but proposed to my wife.
Well,
And
that
that
seems
was
like a fun story.
it's a fun story. It was one of the first good decisions to say, "Hey, I need some stability and commitment in my life, and I need to stop screwing around." And through her support, that was the sort of first good thing that happened to setting me up for success in the rest of my life.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'm sure she is gonna be delighted to hear that. I'm sure she knows that, but every good woman loves a
Uh,
reminder. I can't help, I know we're, like, not even through close to the end of your story, but I can't help but pick up on the grit that you have. The grit of getting a deal signed before you even graduated high school, the grit of toggling both that career journey as well as becoming a full-time university student, the grit to say, I can't handle this. I need to remove myself and put myself in a healthy situation. The grit to start, we call it in our day, starting at the bottom at the ABC
mhm.
to get into a career that you were potentially interested in. It makes me wonder if your grit was amplified because of the legacy thing that you were combating. Not that you were even what's the word I'm looking for? Not that it was like premeditated, like it was all subconscious is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
Like
sure. Yeah.
that you have this legacy to get through and to live up to. And so your grit is in full gear because of it. And like things begat things, like because your grit is so intense. And by the way, another thing that really resonates with me, it's not helpful to the anxiety. It's just, "No, I've got to
No,
go,
not at
I've got
all.
to push, I've got to do, I've got to be." And you don't even know you're doing it. It's just who you are. It's your makeup. It's like a sickness. You're like, calm down.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they very much feed off of each other. I imagine as you host this podcast and have a lot of conversations, there probably is some correlation between entrepreneurial spirit and anxiety. And if you're
for
the kind of
sure.
person that wants to book a ticket on the biggest boat in the roughest storm, then yeah, you're probably going to
What
run
do
into
you
some
have?
anxiety, and not every single day that you want to rush at the proverbial lion in the Coliseum do you actually feel like that. Or you can
Yeah.
feel like one out of every 10 days and still be pursuing that
Yeah.
amazing, big, challenging goal, but that feels very maybe sometimes self-defeating or
Right.
whatever.
What came after the ABC and proposing to your now wife? What was the next career-wise?
I went from bar backing to bartending. Loved that, especially as a more outgoing younger person than the
Mhm.
person maybe I am today, but really enjoyed socializing, making people happy, creating that sort of hospitality environment where people can let their hair down. And I went totally off the deep end into initially spirits knowledge. My mentor, Nick, would quiz me as I was bar backing, and this has been the case for me always, but very unaccepting of my current station and just looking for the next rung up and trying to out punch my weight class. And he's, dude, you started 6 weeks ago. Maybe
What a
just do the job I hired you for. And I'd say, no, I'm happy to be here and doing that. I just need to know more. I need to accomplish more. And so he would say, okay, we'll come back tomorrow and tell me everything you can learn about bourbon. And so, well, I would. I'd come back and stock the bar and then go, hey, so it's 51% corn and it can't be called bourbon unless this. Actually, that's a misnomer. And just roll off the Wikipedia that I snapshot in my brain. And he's, oh, okay, that was more maybe than I was asking you to do. Okay. So he continued to feed me as I continued to say, let me learn. And he's gone on to work for Pernod Ricard and be a big who's who kind of guy in the spirits world. And so to have him as my mentor early on was a lot of fun. But to get back to your question, yeah, it went from bar backing to bartending at sports bars and maybe less serious environments to okay, then I got a job at a new pizza place that was going to have a real beer focus. And so I got to curate a beer list and start educating people on, have you had this kind of beer before? What do you like? Or what are you ordering? Maybe I can suggest something to go with it. It was a great education and it set me up for a cool career path. I'm not sure that someone dealing with anxiety and alcohol use issues should definitely go right into bartending because it can be a bit of a self-fulfilling problem there. But anyway, I enjoyed bartending. I enjoyed making friends with customers, but it was really hard. It was the first time I really had felt shamed about dropping out as I would go to wait a table and in my hometown and some friends' parents or someone who was a sponsor at the school or knew me one way or the other. And I distinctly remember two different experiences. One, waiting tables and having someone say, oh my gosh, I thought you were in New York cutting records. What are you doing here taking my order? And that was really tough.
How did you respond to that? Did you put a spin on it or
I mean, I always try to, right? I'm
yeah.
an honest and not a jerk, but I think my response was like, oh yeah, I'm here. Right. So obviously I'm not doing that. So can I get you one or two lemons in your sweet tea? Very quickly. Yeah, no, this is me wearing my Walmart all black standard
Yeah.
issue server outfit. I'm really not here to talk about why I'm not in New York recording. I quickly tried to smile and shake it off and just turn it right back into my server spiel. And then another time, this kind of is a little funny in the privileged upbringing department, but my parents had an opportunity to go to an art auction and had sent me in their stead because they couldn't be there. And so I was there to see if there was anything particularly cool or impressive and maybe bid on it on in their stead. And I had a bar customer recognize me, well, not really recognize me with a dinner jacket on and whatever else and go. And I can't assume where he was coming from, but he was very much, I think he said verbatim, what are you doing here? And it's, gosh, man, it's a small town art auction. It's not like we're in
You're not at Christie's in New York.
exactly. You're like, I didn't have to pay that much to get in the door, but it was definitely hey, you're a bartender. What the fuck are you doing here with the rest of us high society types? And instead of being like, "Hey, man, I belong here just as much as anyone else," I was very quick to be like, "Yeah, no, you're right. Like, I'm that guy that dropped out of college and started waiting tables." From there, I was like, I don't know how long I would bartend or be in Suffolk or be over, you just really be around anyone that knew from that sort of dichotomy of,
Sure.
yes, I went to high school, and yes, I'm that guy that was on the lacrosse team that you remembered, and I had the cool story of going to New York, but also I'm here today and the fish is on special. So I didn't think that would be much fun. So I started considering a career in commercial real estate, which is what my dad had done, and did some internship time and did the sort of shirt and tie in the office at 9, which was a pretty far cry from the closing the bar at 3 and going
Yeah.
home. Or things, it could have just been that, but it wasn't for me. The office environment was pretty clearly not for me, especially at that time and with my lifestyle choices, et cetera. So I was basically playing local gigs, recording, trying to make a thing out of the music career. I had 3 other friends of mine that were in my band that I felt responsible for trying to continue on the path for success, because they had joined me when I was with my manager and things were going so well. I had the dual pressure of, I want to get this band off the ground, one, because it's really what I want to do with my life and how I want to spend my time, but also because I've got these other guys that have committed their time and lives to doing this. But also at some point, I'm going to have to put a roof over my head. And this doesn't seem to be the best way to do that. And so in 2009, a couple months before I was set to get married, my parents sat me down and said, "Hey, look, they had bought a house here in the Charlottesville area and were spending a lot of time back here. And we're spending weekends in this area and getting to be near their parents who were aging." And this is all unbeknownst to me at the time, but they had thought about putting some grapevines in or maybe growing some grapes and doing like a small white label winery thing, because they really fell in love with this area and the industry in this area in particular. And so I think it was February maybe of '09. They said, "Hey, so in a month we're buying a winery." And I laughed. I was like, "Okay, cool. Congrats. That's exciting." And the specialization I went back to school for in business was in marketing. And that was one thing I realized was an innate skill when it came to self-promotion and just having the sort of gall to go out there and say, "Hey, I'm great. Don't you want to sign me Warner Brothers or whatever?" So I'd had a little bit of that knack for promo wizardry, and they had said, "Hey, we want you to come along and be the marketing manager for the winery." And my initial reaction, I think, was like, "Man, I'm from Suffolk. That's weird. I don't know. Obviously, it sounds great." But for me growing up, Charlottesville was where my grandparents lived. And then it was like this beautiful place, but it was very, to me, academic, right? Because my world when it came to Charlottesville was UVA and the Darden
Yep.
School and things like that. And my sister went to UVA undergrad as well. And so it was a pretty daunting prospect. Is It's funny because in hindsight, obviously I described how relatively miserable I was at the time and unsatisfied in my job. And my wife and I are both scraping just to try to pay rent, whatever. And then there's this opportunity. But what I knew of Charlottesville being UVA, I was like, that's like the either higher education, the public Ivy that they refer to it as being. And it's like, what the hell does Charlottesville and I have in common? And so part of the quote unquote recruitment was to bring my wife up, and we spent a weekend in Charlottesville, and we spent a lot of time downtown and in the neighborhood of Belmont, and just having my parents show me like, no, there's this whole actual town of Charlottesville with lots of people that have jobs and live, and there's a great arts scene and dining scene and all this other stuff. We think you'll love it. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with UVA and maybe my take on what UVA was.
Mhm.
So after going to a few great bars, including one called Beer Run, which is this excellent establishment where I got really passionate about beer, going there as a customer, and basically got a great quesadilla and a number of Belgian beers. It was like, all right, cool. Yeah, it's sold. Uh, what am I thinking? Well,
Yeah.
between the music scene and the food and drink scene, I was like, yep, sold. I'm in.
Mm. What was it like working for the family business?
Oh, it's cool. Yeah, I really liked it. That was
No
never,
tension?
not many. I love the tagline that's on Nevada's beer cans. It says family owned, operated, and fought over. It's very cute and clever and certainly realistic, but we got along really well as work people. There was very little tension aside from the fact that I was still a musician going out late at night, playing gigs up till 2 or 3, and then expected to be in the tasting room and ready to greet customers with a smiling, happy face as early as 10:30. The sort of irony was when I said, yes, and I'm interested in the gig, was if I have an opportunity to continue to play music professionally in a more sort of serious way or start a brewery, I want to do those things. I knew even when I started working at the winery that I wanted to open a brewery. I just had fallen more and more in love with beer itself, the different styles, the history. But especially once I had moved to Charlottesville and was hanging out at places like Beer On and other great beer bars, really fell in love with the camaraderie in the drinks business overall and felt that with wine, but I did not feel very connected to your average winery customer. Young tattooed like punk rock guys. They're mostly folks in their 50s and 60s, dropping $1,000 on a couple of cases or whatever. And while a lot has changed since then, there's generally some truth to the snooty wine drinker and the blue collar beer drinker. And I related more to the latter. I enjoyed my time working for the winery. Was always proud to be affiliated with it, but always had my own path in mind and just continued to work towards it while working there.
How did you finally decide to take a plunge and move on?
I'd been homebrewing the whole time to the extent that I felt that I had some semblance of knowing what I was doing, but between either the sort of pragmatism that was instilled in me by my parents and grandparents or the imposter syndrome that anxiety so lovingly brings to the table, I certainly wasn't going to be like that arrogant homebrewer guy who's like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. I can go pro. So I did a battery of community college courses here that were taught by the other brewery founders and threw myself into that community. And one of them was also into punk rock and just a great dude and took me under his wing. So I shadowed him at his brew house for a little while. And then the sort of final test for myself was I did a course through the Siebel Institute, which is a German brewing school traditionally that also has a facility in Chicago. At that point was when I started writing a business plan. And I think I went out and bought business plans for dummies. I should have relied on the strength of my network and family more at the time, but I was if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it myself. And so I'm going to go buy the business book instead of learn from one of the best business minds in the country. But obviously I have plenty of support. Once I did then write the business plan, I was able to share it for feedback. And so that was one of obviously the biggest advantages that I had was great early counsel on that's a cool idea, but what's going to happen if you do this or do that? And so the advice was very helpful. But once I'd written my little business plan and took it down to FedEx and got it spiral bound and all the other things, we started having meetings with commercial bankers to talk about an SBA loan to get it off the ground.
Where was the first facility that you opened?
We found a great location, pretty much downtown. Good confluence of, we've got some regulars in the neighborhood, but also we're proximate to a high tourist traffic destination, all that other stuff. So found a small 3,000 square foot spot for lease. We started much smaller than we had hoped. It took us about a year to get a no from the bigger banks. There was one in particular was very gung-ho on the idea and really worked with us for about a year. My wife actually worked in the same building as the bank. And so the banker would sometimes ride the elevator down with my wife at the end of the day and go, hey, you're going to be a brewery owner. How about that? And then 6 months later, there was an underwriter that had backed a California brewery that failed. And so it was doom and gloom. And this is not a good idea. This is not a good business. They'll never make a profit. And so they said, actually, maybe not. But after a whole year of being told exactly how the loan was going to go and what the structure was going to be, we knew that in order to get the SBA loan, we were going to have to raise 30% of the total that we wanted to deploy. And we had. And so when a year later, my wife and I were actually taking a trip to Asheville, North Carolina, and its burgeoning craft beer hub. And I pulled into the hotel parking lot for our exciting beer trip before we opened the brewery kind of thing. And it was the last bank calling with the last no. And so the dream seemed pretty much shot as we just started this weekend in Asheville to have fun and drink beer and get excited about opening a brewery. I thought, okay, we've got this 30% that we've raised that we were going to deploy as part of the SBA equity. What could I do for that was what was rattling in my head. And I think that maybe speaks to a little bit of the grit you're talking about. And maybe it's just being a little impetuous, but I was like, okay, I hear you. No, but what else could we do? And I just, for better or worse, never taken no particular well.
Mm.
And so my wife looked at me in the car before we got our bags and went to the hotel and was like, can you not let this ruin the weekend? And I was like,
Brutal.
yeah. I laughed. I was like, yeah, sure. But we just tried to keep rolling and enjoy the time in Asheville. And we took a tour, a guided tour of Highland Brewing Company, which is a pretty highland, pretty big regional brewery in that area. And at the end of the tour, it was bittersweet. I've got misty eyed walking around looking at all the tanks and the canning line and all this cool shit we were going to get with our SBA loan. And then at the end, they said, over here is our pilot system where our brewers develop new recipes and do some R&D. And it's a small little system in a closed off room, probably 1,000 square feet. And the whole time I'm elbowing my wife on the tour, hey, we could do that. That's what we could do. We could just fucking exist. Wells Fargo was so concerned with our ability to turn a profit in the first year. I bet maybe we could just do that and go turn a profit and come back and say, hey, we're not a startup. And that's basically what we did. I got back to the hotel room after the tour. I immediately looked up on my laptop and pulled up the projections and okay, all right, it's not $1 million operation. It's a $300,000 operation. And what does that do to the model? Okay, shit, there's no salary to hire a brewer. So I guess that's me. And so we scaled it down from, okay, we're going to open this 15-barrel small production brewery with a hired brewer with a lot of experience to we're just going to do what I now know as being the minimum viable product strategy, which is just do it and get it off the ground and fail fast if need be, but just fucking go for it.
And it's my understanding that over time you grew quite substantially. Talk to me about that growth, what that looked like.
Yeah. So this sort of logical extension of what was happening at the tap room, which is what we called the original brewery, where I was brewing everything with help from my brother-in-law, and a good friend of ours had come over to be the opening bar manager. And we were fortunate. We were busy. We were the first brewery in Charlottesville that wasn't a brew pub, and it was just all the rage, craft beer in early teens, right? We were slammed. We were very fortunate. I'd made a good, strong social network through being a musician and working at the winery and stuff. So we had a little bit of a latent clientele, but we got to the point where basically two things happened. One was I always intended to go back to the bank that said no and say, hey, like we're not a startup, so let's go. And we had gotten to the point where I think once or twice we had 2 or 3 beers on tap because I couldn't keep up with producing them. And that was embarrassing and a good way to go out of business in its own right. And so in order to preserve the existing business, we needed to expand into, larger scale manufacturing. And that was the plan all along. So about a year in, we looked at the financials and we made, I think, $3,000 in profit our first year and took that back to Wells and was like, hey, look, we made 3,000. We're profitable year one. I don't have any experience with knowing this, but from what I hear, that's not common. So yeah, not only are we post revenue now, I mean, these are terms I know now that I didn't then, but how about that $1 million SBA loan we talked about? And I'm oversimplifying it, but that's pretty much what happened. They were like, all right, yeah, okay, you've got some strength of guarantor with the family, which I obviously was a great leg up. But once we existed, then we found a facility about a mile down the road in the Woolen Mills neighborhood. And we went from a 3-barrel system to a 30-barrel system. And then hired a good friend of mine who was one of the lead brewers at another local brewery and built the facility and started scaling up the recipes in the tap room. I like to joke that going from a 3 to 30, it was not much harder than adding a 0 to most of the recipes. There's a little more finesse than that, but things scaled up pretty well. We didn't have that, oh, we went from cooking at home to cooking for guests, and now I really suck. It really, with the help of some experienced folks that joined the team, it translated fairly well, and we started canning beer, and then won a gold medal for our Pilsner in 2015, just a year into that facility's operations. And so it was a quick ramp from tap rooms running out of beer. Guess we need a production brewery. Good thing we already have a lender and a business plan in our pocket to go back to. And then from there it was, okay, we've got a distributor. There were lots of meetings that I'm sure would make me cringe to be a fly on the wall for now when I'm pitching the concept and the brands to a distributor. And we went with a craft oriented distributor who was a Belgian importer that really knew the craft world better than I was. Daunted by the idea of signing on with a bud distributor or something like that. But yeah, that was it. We went from the tap room to the production facility to just statewide distribution in Virginia with one distributor, added North Carolina after that. And then in the coming years, kept pursuing that growth, the rapid, almost vertical growth, not surprisingly, eventually stopped. So we needed to find more places for the dollars to come from. So we had, by 2017, 2018, switched our growth model to let's open more direct to consumer bars than just keep putting it on a truck and then collect the diminishing returns.
I'm not quite sure how to go into
How we got to the bad part?
Yeah, sorry.
Sure. The growth just slowed. It got considerably more competitive in the craft beer market. God, the best marketing phrase I heard at a conference was, if you remember the game in kindergarten where we all grab a corner of the parachute and lift it up and everyone runs under the middle while the parachute's in the air, and that's lots of fun. That was like the 2010 to 2015 of the beer industry was like, yay, we all quit our lucrative jobs and fuck them in. And now we own a brewery. We're all getting drunk and it's super fun. And then our little cottage industry got real. And not only did we have more and more entrants as we went from 1,500 to 3,000 to 5,000 to 8,000 breweries in the country, but also through acquisition or like crafty labeling, like the Blue Moons of the world, the big guys got into the conversation as well. It got very competitive. We opened our first restaurant in Charlottesville called Brasserie Saison. Credit to my late partner, Will Ritchie, who made it an awesome restaurant. It was a fine dining restaurant. There's really no two ways about it. And so it wasn't a great beer mover. We got so passionate about this awesome restaurant, and I think we both wanted to maybe chase a James Beard nomination or something like that. And so we were really shooting to the moon, losing sight completely of the fact that the goal was to move beer. At the same time, opened a joint in Richmond that was cool, and we had a good team, but it had none of the components that made the Charlottesville location so successful. So between those two projects that very much took my focus, we've got production brewery that it's got losses. It's never really been cash flowing independently, but it's always had the profitability of the tap room to carry it. And now we've got some of these new sub entities with strategic partners and stuff. And we closed Richmond in 2019 around the same time that we decided that we needed to go raise some outside capital for the first time. And so as we're growing, diversifying, 2019, we went out to raise $1 million locally and really scale things and develop this new hospitality group. And then COVID hit. Basically, we've reached what I would call max capacity at our production brewery. And then I personally had reached max capacity as a business owner of how many things I could manage. And we were set up for success. We raised a good bit of money. We had what I thought was a pretty great plan, and then life punched us in the face. We opened the day after Christmas or something like that in 2019. So we had about one great month of revenue in January at our third restaurant location, Champion Grill. It was really doing well, selling a lot of beers, great atmosphere, and we loved it. St. Patrick's Day, all the bars shut down. And in hindsight, that was pretty much that. We managed to continue to open a few new locations, almost all of which were planned pre-COVID. So we were just, in hindsight, seems idiotic, but really just stubbornly holding to the existing plans that we had. The other thing is we were being told by the White House and other sources that this was going to last 3 months. If you believed it was real at all, which not everybody did, including some people that I worked with, half of our market just completely went to shit. Bars were closed. They were forced to close. Kegs were 50% of our revenue, and we didn't lay anybody off. We were fortunate to get some of the PPP and other sort of loans that really just covered rent and payroll and kept the business afloat. So we carried our same heavy payroll for the better part of 2 years during COVID, and the restaurants, when they could be open, were the tables 6 feet apart and all of the other types of restrictions. Yeah, we really poised ourselves for growth and raised a bunch of capital at kind of a perfect storm kind of time. And then really since March of 2020, it was just a matter of survival. How can we pool our resources? How many people can work at different places? We really just never recovered from losing half of our revenue for the better part of 2 years. We tried to make up for the loss of keg sales by having more restaurants and selling more kegs ourselves. But even then, that model was screwed because those were the places that weren't allowed to be open. Yeah, there are things that, of course, in hindsight, I could have done differently. We could have let half the team go. We could have done some more preventative measures, but I've always been a sort of not conservative, offense first kind of person to say, "Hey, we're going to grow through growth. We're not going to shave ourselves down to profitability." There are other philosophies when it comes to that, and maybe we could have, but my perspective was, hey, we're going to try and wait out the
Oh,
storm.
yeah.
We've got some good investors who were committed and didn't want to see us close from COVID. But when that became a 3-year thing, not a 3-month thing, we all just saw the writing on the wall. And some of the things that were a leg up initially, like an SBA loan through the EIDL, that was great to get 6 figures worth of support from the SBA, but it was fully guaranteed and had a time where we'd have to start paying it back. And so I think a lot of businesses have been set up to fail in that regard because they get some support that keeps them open for longer. But then when it's time to start paying the loan back, you've just got more expenses than you had before. But yeah, a culmination of the lack of revenue, the debt we took on, et cetera, just all pulled everything down at the December of 2022.
And what's the status today of you and those businesses?
Bankrupt,
Yeah.
be honest. Yeah. It's just game over.
How
Yeah. So
did that make you feel?
lost, totally rudderless. I was extremely disappointed to close the production brewery. That was my baby. That was the reason we got into business at all. And most of the people on payroll, were people I'd consider some of my best friends. Yeah, that was truly terrible. And one of the worst things about it was we had licensed the brand to a third party in hopes that we could get some revenue and pay off some of the debt. And bungling the press for that, I sounded excited in those press releases. And I know that the perception was that I was running away with the ball and going to continue to go make money off of this thing that we had built as a team with a lot of the value coming from the labor of the team. So that was the particularly rough part for me, was getting villainized for selling out or whatever, continuing to quote unquote profit off a company that never turned a profit while laying people off that I loved and cared about. So that, yeah, I felt absolutely awful and really didn't know how to move forward, being depressed and not being able to get out of bed. And that was definitely the case lots of days out of 2023. We tried to keep 2 of our restaurants that were still open by recapitalizing them, but that we weren't successful in that effort. And in hindsight, they probably should have just closed when the brewery closed instead of just letting one more domino fall slowly and disappoint people along the way as we run out of resources, et cetera. Yeah, in hindsight, I wish it had been one big difficult lump when everything was just difficult and ugly and terrible. And we dragged that out for 6 months. And then for the next 6 months, which were frankly, the past 6 months, we had tried to be recapitalizing the play with a private equity partner, but really didn't find a lot of success there. And it's basically just been time to wave the white flag and say, hey, like, this thing's toast.
How do you feel about your future potential now?
Now, good. But if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have said, let me try to be alive tomorrow and worry about my future
Yeah.
when that there's going to be one. I was not in a good spot.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, when we spoke, I can't remember, what was it, like September, October? I sensed, yeah, obviously, I don't know you. We haven't spent any time together, but I sensed in your tone anger. And I don't sense that today. Do you feel like that's a relevant description of you at that time when we spoke? And have you moved on, or are you just masking it a little bit, or are you kind
I'm
of going through all the stages of grief? Like,
yeah, exactly. I was angry. Yeah, I was really mad. Frustration and disappointment with myself, with the scenario, with how things have been handled. I spent a lot of time doing the woulda, coulda, shoulda thing. That's not a very helpful hamster wheel. I took a lot of lumps reputationally over the way that things went down. And we looked like we were hot shit in the community when we were growing so quickly. And so when we failed so fast and so emphatically, At our peak, we had 100 employees, and then within a year we had 0. So it's just this sort of brutal tank in a very public way, because I've always been pretty noisy and have done a good job at getting attention. And that's a double-edged sword. And we have some former partners that had shared some of their displeasure in less than what I would call tasteful ways. And so I had a lot of resentment. I felt like maybe there was some, frankly, reputational assassination going on. So I was just very feeling like not vengeful, but just fuck, like this didn't have to go like this.
Yeah.
But I've let go of a lot of that. I've had no choice, to be honest with you. As someone who was running a brewery when I quit drinking, I've had some difficult conversations with myself and done some difficult things in my life. And so I felt that at the root of things that I'd be fine. But yeah, I was mad that I felt like we probably could have done something differently in order to have saved the company or save the jobs or save the investment from some people that I really care about. I was just mad at everything, at the circumstances, at myself, at some of the people I worked with. There was a lot of bitterness, and ultimately long, difficult conversations in the mirror or with my wife or parents, and try to get it out of your system and realize that whatever I might have done differently, it's too late. And I'm going to have to fucking feed my kids and pay my mortgage and keep a roof over my head. And that's not going to happen through being vindictive. I'm certainly not going to earn any reputation back by fucking swashbuckling on Reddit with people who are like uninformed and really opinionated and enthusiastic about what I could or should have done differently, and just try to breathe through it and be like, man, let's mourn it. Let's get to the part where we're mad at the powers that be for taking the person we lost, so to speak, and get to the part of doing the celebration of life kind of thing. And that's a bad metaphor because I lost both of my grandparents at the same time, my grandma in June and then my grandfather at the end of the year. Yeah, it's just a lot. But those were also like growth opportunities too. There was a lot of what I would have considered either status quo or my support system that was just the sort of magician trick with the dinner cloth of just people that I thought the world of are gone. Other people I thought the world of, they used to work for me, resent me for having to let them go. Yeah, there was just a lot of sort of acceptance that was like, I'm never going to be productive. I'm never going to be either qualified for a job if I can't let this shit go. And if I've got this cloud of failed former founder thing, like that's not a great interview mindset. And I was definitely thinking to hell with entrepreneurship and starting a business. And I'm just going to go work for Aflac or whatever and just be left alone in my misery. And over the holidays and some progressive conversations with some really good friends, I've just gotten my sea legs and just gotten back to the point of being like, yep, that sucked. That was a really hard failure, but I learned an insane amount, as much from the failure as I did from our success.
When did you decide to get sober?
The night that we opened the last restaurant that we opened. So we had sort of friends and family thing, and I enjoyed a cocktail with dinner. It was nice. I was really excited to open this restaurant. And then I went home and had my requisite bottle of wine or two to myself and woke up the next day feeling like shit, obviously. And just had that like burden of not only hangover anxiety, but also the sense of, man, we have a lot going on. I'm hurting myself. I've gained a lot of weight. I've not always made every appointment I'm supposed to. Like this a little late in the sort of trajectory of the company I got, where I was fed up with my own bullshit. Honestly, it's like, this is not productive. I've always been the sort of like gritty, determined kind of person. And yet I've had this crutch / leash on me holding me back. It was like, I'm never going to be who I need to be. It was like, I just do not have the physiological capacity to have a beer. If I do, it's 6, just how it goes.
Yeah. I have to think that decision was extremely beneficial, although I'm sure very difficult, to have been made in advance of your 2023.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah. I'm very much glad that I have a very hard time imagining having handled what I handled without the sort of clarity and strength of being sober and having my wife and family behind me. No, I was very fortunate. Right behind getting married and having kids is best decision made.
Good for you. I'm super grateful for the time, and I loved the conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed the opportunity too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Effing Up. I'm your host, Deanne Reiner. If you enjoyed today's episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe on the platform you use to listen to podcasts. Share Effing Up with others, post about it on social media, and/or leave a rating and review. Until next time, count your perceived failures as part of your path to success. After all, we're all effing up.